Koby Altman,
Sure.
end of the season press conference, talking about what the Cavs need.
I think there's a mental toughness that you have to get through going through these failures in the playoffs. I think people will speak to the physicality. It was a physical series against the Pacers, but watch every single series. They're all physical. They're all grabbing the hold. They're all pushing from afar. This was different because it wasn't like we were getting shoved around. We went into this playoff saying we want to win the possession battle, right? And we did that in large portion. We doubled the Pacers in offensive rebounding. So when you think about those intangible hustle stats, we had 70 offensive rebounds, they had 35. So this wasn't a just push around, we're not tough. Like, there's a mental toughness that we're going to have to get to that a lot of the Pacers had. A lot of the Pacers had that experience of, conference finals. Pascal Siakam was a champion, second best player on a championship team.
Yeah, I know you were at the press. What was your takeaway? We listened to that for 45, 50 minutes. What was your takeaway?
I like the way you put that. Yeah, I mean, it felt very much, I don't want to say totally copy and paste from last year, because there were some things he said different from last year to this year. I think it's especially centered around the core four. Like last year, there was a lot of highlighting of the four guys, and this year was a lot more Mobley, Mitchell, and Garland, a little less Jared Allen. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But as a whole, yeah, I do think it was a classic Koby Altman press conference where he paints things in a more rosy way. And it's not that I was expecting, because he's in a very precarious situation, right? He's the GM of the team, or he's the president of basketball operations of the team. Like, he can't be out here throwing guys under the bus and nuking their trade value and different things like that. Like, he has to kind of play his cards right in that way. But I also just think, I don't know. The big thing for me, the biggest question I still have is, I can wrap my head around, yes, Evan Mobley taking another step is something that we believe is going to help us get closer to that end goal. I think there is another level to Evan's game, and he is still, as a 23-year-old, learning how to do it in the playoffs and how to demand the ball more and these different things. I think that's 100% true. But I don't know that I can say that for every one of these players. Like, Jared Allen is somebody who, at this point, he should have it figured out. He is at 27, entering the prime of his career, like, or he should be. Like, I can't make that same excuse for somebody of the veteran prowess, the career he has, all that different stuff. He should know by now. And I also think, like, I want to know, if you're in that position that Koby Altman's in, what's the cutoff between believing, hey, development is still the direction for us, versus now we have to actually make a change because it's not working? Because that's his big point, is we still think development is going to get us over the top and we're going to keep learning and getting better. But there has to be a point where if the same thing keeps happening and you keep losing in the playoffs in the same fashion, at what point do you decide, okay, now we reached a point where development, there's not much of that left. There's no runway left on that. Now we actually just have to make some changes. And I don't know if that's this offseason. He answered another question sort of pertaining to that about, if they were going to panic and make a move, it would have been last year. So it feels like they're sort of poised to run a lot of this team back. And I can wrap my head around that to an extent. But I just think if you're looking at this team, where they're at, how they finished this season, highly disappointing, obviously, as we know. I don't know how you can't think like it's time to change something around with the core four. And I'm not saying make a trade just to make a trade either. I know that's the thing that people get caught up in, is like, do you just do it to do it? I'm not saying that. But if the right move can be had, I think you absolutely have to look at changing something out of that core four group, just to bring a different sort of perspective or a different attitude or a different mindset to that group, and see if that helps you get over the top as well. I think there's some development that needs to happen. I think two things can be true at once. Some development needs to happen, and you maybe need to look at changing the roster a little bit.
Yeah, the concerning thing is they played their style of basketball and it was good. And then they didn't play it against the Pacers. The Pacers, did they take their mental toughness? They made them change the way they played in the biggest games.
Yeah.
There were a lot of dribbling, not as much passing. That's concerning. You got to figure that out.
Yeah, and I do think Koby did make a couple really good points on just like giving credit to the Pacers. I think the Pacers do deserve a lot of credit, because they got the Cavs out of what they wanted to do pretty early on in that series. And that is something that the mental toughness part of that's something they need to develop. That is something they need to learn. Like when a team's trying to get us out of that, how do we dictate the pace? How do we dictate, controlling the tempo and what we want to do and making sure that we're running the offense and doing what got us here, right? They have to sort of be able the ones to put their foot down on those things. So that is, I think, a learning process part of this. I also think too, and this is going to sound like an excuse, like the injuries did play a major factor in that, like in them losing their identity completely. Game one, the Pacers set the tone, and then you lose Evan, you lose DeAndre for that next game, and then I think even though you should have won that game, but I just think that took them completely out of even remembering what their identity was. Like they were just so out of sync at that point that I just think they could never really recover. And that's another that speaks again to being resilient, being able to overcome those things mentally, and those are all things they have to work on. So I think the Pacers were a big part of that. But you're right, they have to find a way to get over that hump and be the ones who, hey, we're a 64-win team that won a certain way. You can't let your identity just disappear like that on that stage. And I think that's something they have to continue to sort of answer and figure out here.
Yeah, and again, it's not easy. You know what? Everybody was calling for them to change the core four. They showed they can play a little differently. Now the question is, can you find a way to do what you need to do when it matters?
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good way to put it. And Kobe sort of gave some credence to that, where he was like, listen, we figured out the regular season. Now it's about the next 16. And that's the question everyone kind of has on their mind is how do you do it on that stage? We all think we have an idea. We think the Cavs have to get tougher. I think that's part of it. It's just like an attitude thing. Evan Mobley and Jared Allen are very similar personality-wise. Like, can they function together? I think is a valid question at this point. So, the Kobe, I think, deserves credit for sticking with this group and seeing what he could get out of them with Kenny Atkinson. And Kenny deserves a lot of credit for taking them to a whole nother level. But like you said, you got it to you took him to another place. Now it's about figuring out that next hurdle, which is okay. Now how does it translate to the playoffs? And that's why Donovan Mitchell said, if we could go 82-0 next year, no one's going to care, because until you do it on that stage, no one's going to believe that this team is for real. So that's the next big thing for them to clear.